Well, good afternoon, everyone. Bienvenidos. You have joined us today for Cultivating Voices live poetry for our second reading of October. I'm Sandy Yannone, your host, and I'm the author of Boats for Women from Salmon Poetry. I'm joining you today from Olympia, Washington, and if it's the second or fourth Sunday, you're here to hear the poetry in our new books showcase. Today's showcase is a spectacular array of poets who actually are very familiar with each other. They work together in a variety of ways, joining us from Ireland and Scotland. And of course, generally, we appreciate being able to provide all of you with a virtual venue weekly, with a very enthusiastic audience, live here in our Zoom room and on Facebook. This week, we crossed the 3,000 member threshold worldwide for our group, our Facebook group, which is astounding. It's our international, intersectional, and intergenerational Facebook group that was started in the late March of 2020 as the pandemic was beginning to kind of rage across the globe. And I remember when I was overjoyed in April of 2020 when we hit 300 members. So you can imagine hitting the 3,000 mark. I want to also, before we get started with the reading, thanks again to our incredible readers last week for our unique, scintillating reading from the new titles from Lost Horse Press, particularly showcasing, we had the beautiful opportunity to showcase poetry, Ukrainian poetry in translation, and want to thank Christine Holbert for bringing her new titles and poets to us for last week's reading. Well, you can always check out that reading on our recording of Cultivating Voices live Facebook page or on our YouTube channel, and we thank Don Krieger for that. I want to always remind everybody the chats here are live in the Zoom room. If you want to send all the love and enthusiasm to our Fab Four for today. And let's get to the four poets for today. Well, as you know, because I publish with Salmon Poetry, I'm always pleased when I can have some of my siblings with me in the audience and live reading. And first today, we have Jessamine O'Connor. And I also want to just say that I've had the pleasure to hear Jessamine read twice, including at the amazing launch party that you had from the train station. It was incredible. And I believe it was a train station. It's back in my mind, but that's what I'm seeing. So it's such a pleasure to welcome folks from the family, so to speak, and to be able to start with Jessamine today, a little bit more on the more official biography while folks continue to join our room. Jessamine O'Connor is a Dublin-born writer living on the Sligo-Roscommon border in the sandy west of Ireland. She is the winner of the inaugural Comhghairdeas Filiochta Chultúrin Macadam O'Fich 2020 award with a poem translated by Oli Dermode. She also won the Poetry Ireland Butler's Cafe competition in 2020 2017, and previously has been awarded the I. Yates and Francis Ledwidge Awards. Her debut collection, as I mentioned before, came out earlier this year with Salmon poetry called Silver Spoon. Get ready, my friends, for Jessamine O'Connell.
Thanks very much, Sandy. Can you hear me okay? Am I close enough? Okay. I'm reading from my new book, Silver Spoon, and I'll just jump in because I don't want to take up loads of time because there's 4 of us. And I'm just going to start at the beginning with a poem that is the island speaking to refugees or anybody else coming to the island for somewhere to live, to call home. Welcome. I open up my craggy arms, my cliffs, this shift of whirling gulls, stretch my beaches wide, reach out my hands made of coral, stone, and sand, scatter islands like roses or breadcrumbs to show you where to land. And when you're close enough, I'll lift up the rough cloth of my hedges, fields, and locks, wrap its patchwork cloak around you, gather the lush green folds and rolls of sequin blues to make an earth cocoon for you to grow in. Because when you're rested and ready to stir, it will be my pleasure to watch your wings unfold, unfurl in my cloud-thick hair, sprout your new roots, feet deep, into my lungs and feed me your fresh air. And following that, if I can find, well, this one is kind of self-explanatory. Meet me for coffee. Not a cup of tea, a pint, or just meet me, because I want to wait awkward at a counter beside you, with the steam spluttering, the espresso machine knocking, and our overdressed elbows almost touching. I want to sit opposite you at a small table that can never be small enough, absorbing the heat of your hidden knees and then eyes when I catch you, watching me lick the froth off my lips. I want us to be both fiddling with our round white cups, thumbing the holes that make the handles, intense with conversation while idling our fingers around and around those curves. I want to be alone with you in a clamorous place where no one will notice what's not being said. That's why I say safely, meet me for coffee, instead of suggesting something else. And this is a pantoum set in a seaside town called Gaza. At the seaside, small boy throwing stones into a wide blue sky. He scoops quickly, watching as the first ones fall. Into a wide blue sky, he pitches arcing armfuls. As the first ones fall, the sun is bright in his eyes. He pitches arcing armfuls, watching them, watch him. The sun is bright in his eyes as the tank starts slowly turning. Watching them, watch him, long gone beyond fear. As the tank starts slowly turning, he flings freely, just one more. Long gone beyond fear, he scoops quickly, watching. He flings freely, just one more small boy throwing stones. And I suppose this is this one is explaining why I didn't watch a TV documentary about Gaza was called One Day in Gaza, and why I don't really watch any TV documentaries or read anything distressing after a certain hour at night. It's my life hack, as my kids call it, for keeping my head above water in difficult times. And I'm going to share my life hack with you. It's called Watershed. Learning to live in the world we live in without drowning means choosing canned laughter over one day in shock. And learning to live, to sleep, means that. It means no news at night, no documentaries about airstrikes, refugee camps, and hereditary poverty. No children growing in rubble or dinghies drooping into turquoise seas. Learning to live means avoiding history, current affairs, any futuristic programming, and definitely steering clear of climate, topsoil, bees, and language. Learning to sleep means closing your eyes to the world at night. There is all day to scream. So the great thing about having a new book with Salmon is that it's a collection, but it's a little bit of a greatest hits because it has old ones in as well as new ones. So this is probably one of my first poems that I wrote, and yeah, so it has some of my first. It's mostly newer, but this is one of my first poems, and it's called Hell's Teeth. His house is sinking, the tin roof crumbling. He was springtime, up on rotten ladders, painting it red. A balancing act, juggling brush, can, and glass. I used to sit on cushions outside, looking up, squinting, pouring the drinks, laughing, cautioning him on the treachery of ladders. Now a hedge eats the front of the house. I try not to see it, flying past on the road, because I can't stop. He isn't belly deep in rushes or chasing pigs. His dog doesn't hear my car coming. There's nothing out of date to drink. No one there since he's been gone. Every day of the last 10 years. Well, that was an old one, but I'm going to read this, although it's not in the book, because it is very new, and it's really just kind of how I'm feeling right now. I don't know if it's the same everywhere, but this is just how I'm feeling about the divisiveness going on at the moment in Ireland. So I'll read this one. It's called Divide and Conquer. I keep saying there's a middle ground, as if repetition will make it believable. Hold my tongue so hard it hurts. Bury my head, be defiantly upbeat. Appreciate what we get away with this week. Disagree, but don't publicly disagree with anyone. Keep it in. Shh, breathe. Hide the crack opening under my squirming feet. Don't say what I see. The fracturing of everyone, conveniently. Wasn't there something we were trying to do before this? Wasn't there something bigger happening? Half my friends are fearful and knuckling down devoutly, appalled at the unbelievers, even though, shrug, they don't know what to believe themselves anymore. And half are hugging strangers, declaring their independent thought while cheering for our lifelong enemies, because on this one thing they agree. Sneering at the obedient sneer back furiously, and I keep mildly deflecting the mania until I'm manically defective and glitching. It's so hard to hold firm to a wishy-washy position. Not knowing how to sit on the fence, it wobbles precariously, but I cling on, because underneath looks so dismal and far away, though all I really want is to stamp it to pieces and set the pieces on fire. Send smoke signals out that say, remember, we still have this whole world to fight for. I'm hoping I'm okay for time. I'm also going to go out on a limb, and there's a couple of long poems in the book, but one is one I've never read any of before because it is a long poem that I wrote as a poem film, and Eithne Muraku, who's a wonderful actress, she narrated the film, so she read the poem. So I've never read it, and I'm not going to read it all now because it's like way too long. But I'm going to read a couple of little snippets, or a couple of little pieces from the poem because I want to. And it's really about, it's called The Stranger, and it's about being a stranger or a newcomer to a place. So it's in kind of there's two main characters really in the story. And this first one is a newcomer who's come from over the water to live in a small town near me, in a small town in Ireland. So I'll just read a little bit from their point of view, and then I'll read another bit. So this is just from the beginning. The stranger. Will I always be the stranger? Is that who I am? Can I ever be at home in this town? It's too big to be this small. I reach out with my hands and smile, but the road's too wide. The wind is too strong. I reach out and out, but you're gone. There's a wall, but it's safe, or safer than home, or what used to be home, back across the sea, though everywhere is across the sea from here, the sea or the ocean. I came by plane, of course, hours of darkness, high over the water, suddenly becoming a vivid chessboard underneath, 100 greens, all the shades that can be made of rain. I come from the city of the drizzle, so I like it here, the rain, the grey, and people are friendly, obviously, but there's a wall in the friendliness, bricks I can't see. Maybe they're glass, ice, made of space or other invisible things like history, DNA, dreams. I don't know. We talk all the time, have good conversations in the shop or outside. We laugh a lot. I like them, but I've never seen the inside of their kitchens. And I'll read another bit from later, and from the point of view of somebody from that small town who is making their home somewhere else, in this case, New York, or really any big city, but this is them. I'll start kind of halfway through. Okay, the sky is empty because it's so bright. You can't see out of it. Empty, but alive with human activity, busy, heavy with helicopters, drones and planes, buzzing and cluttered, so that there's no space beyond it. The city is like a pit of gravity nothing escapes from. In sleepless nights, I stare up and up, but can never find them. There are no stars here. They must all be at home, stretched out, arms wide, legs loose over the bog. I miss them. Can I say I miss the stars? And the rushes and the puddles and the shit-caked cows and the way you get away with nothing and the miserable looking faces in the shop on Sunday mornings and all the relations you're tied to but don't really know, living somewhere nearby. All the funeral handshakes and wedding blackouts and talk about weather, the tiny scandals and endless chatter. Who was in the new car? Or back to the old ways? Can I say I miss all that, but I don't miss home? Can I say I miss the stars? I will finish there because I think I've gone probably over my time, so I'll leave that. Thank you very much.
Oh, absolutely beautiful. The book is Silver Spoon. There it is again, from Salmon Poetry. Jessamine O'Connor, thank you so very, very much, as your poetry brings into a clear, crystalline focus that, you know, the whole world is worth that fight. The smallest image that we seek to see, and the humanity among, you know, all of those people, even if there is so much fracturing, as you said, the fracturing of everyone, which of course, I, and I'm sure other folks in the States as well, I won't speak for anyone else but myself, feel so poignantly here, and that we continue to use poetry to bring those things that are invisible into view. Thank you so much for doing that today, starting us off just so clearly and stunningly. A
Thank you, Sandy.
true, beautiful way to get us on our way this afternoon, evening for some of you. Well, our next poet is Hugh McMillan. And I want to, before I share Hugh's biography, I want to share that if you were an early member of Cultivating Voices live poetry, I hope that you appreciated as much as I appreciated the months of dedication that Hugh also was putting into curating poetry that was speaking through and with the tides of the pandemic. You can go on to Cultivating Voices live poetry and look up the many poems and poets that he posted and featured on our site. And they really truly helped me acclimate to the times that I was, and frankly still am, experiencing. So I want to particularly thank you publicly, Hugh, for the many, among the many other contributions, that particular contribution that really touched me so often during the many weeks and months of 2020 in particular. Well, Hugh McMillan is a poet from Penpont in southwest Scotland. His work has been published variously, widely, vastly in Scotland and beyond. He's won a number of prizes, most recently the Callum MacDonald Memorial Award in 2017 for Sheep Penned, which was published by Roncadora. And in 2021, Luath published two collections, Haphazardly in the Starless Night and Whit, poems in Scots about Scottish history. In 2020, he was chosen as one of 4 poetry champions. Don't we need more poetry champions in the world? Absolutely, right, my friends? He was chosen as one of 4 poetry champions for Scotland to seek out and commission new work. It is certainly a thing that he does astoundingly well. And in 2021, he was chosen as the editor of Best Scottish Poems. Again, it is just an absolute privilege, honor, and delight to be able to welcome this poetry citizen, Hugh McMillan. Thank you.
Well, thank you. What an absolutely wonderful introduction. And thank you so much, Sandy. So I'm joining you from Galloway in southwest Scotland. And Sandy mentioned 2 collections there, which have just come out from a publisher called Lewis Press. One of them is called Whit, and one of them is called Haphazardly in the Starless Night, the latter being a collection of English language poems, and the former, Whit, being a collection of Scots language poems on the subject of Scottish history. So I don't know whether I'm going out on a limb here by starting off with one of them. Scots language, which I know some of you will know about since you're from Scotland. I've had a look at the wee names here, but other folk might not know. Scots and English are sister languages. Some people call Scots a dialect, but it's not. It's that's like calling English a dialect. Scots and English have the same root, but went in sort of separate directions, if you like. So this what if is a Scots language collection about what if certain things had happened in Scottish history to make things slightly different. Scottish history is a very political issue in Scotland because of our constitutional problems with the rest of the United Kingdom and so on. But I'll not go into that in any great sort of detail or whatever, but I'll plunge straight in with a bit of Scots. So try and, I don't know whether you'll follow it or not, probably will, probably won't even be able to read it properly. But anyway, it takes the form of certain possible avenues of Scottish history. And one of the things that happened in Scottish history, of course, was St. Columba came over to Scotland from Ireland and converted the Picts, one of our most ancient races, to Christianity, using one of the Pictish princesses as a great sort of influencer in this sort of job. So in my poem, St. Columba doesn't spread Christianity in Scotland, but in fact gets strangled by Eithne, the Pictish princess, thus perpetuating paganism and stopping Christianity at source, which some might say is a good thing. Anyway, this is if Columba had been chowkit by Eithne. Broad day in the Cruithanath, the leaves drapping siller and gowd, girds for the goddess Anan, whose birthday blood and veins create all fish and fruit and leash craters of the wood. I had a dream last night that I was in a prison of words sae glitty I couldn't sklim out. They were soft and slestery and easy to say, these words. The kind wee lassies aft here, hot from the mouths of liars and thieves. Yon man, glazy in his white goon, would hear us learn the words he says. But I hae the gift, and wit the finish of things. Nae convent for me. I will pit my strang horns round his weaselly thrapple and choke his life out. Send him back to his wheel-red god. Keep my ain. There you are, a wee bit Scots for you. I'll give you another Scottish poem towards the end if you like. I don't know how well that went down or whatever. Anyway, I'm very interested in history. I'm an broken down history teacher, and I always thought Scottish history is not very well represented. One of the things we have in Scotland is we don't know enough of our own history, and we get, it's no fault of the English, but because we're in the UK, where 10 times as many people are English, we tend to get a kind of great menu of English history the entire time. So everything to do with films and TV and books, it's all to do with the Tudors and English history and so on. Tudors who were psychopaths who murdered half of Scotland's lowland population. But anyway, I like to write sort of Scottish poems to sort of redress the balance, but also to find wee kind of curious bits to do with our history. And this is one called Margaret de Cosse. Now, Margaret Stuart, who was the daughter of James II, was married to a French Dauphin, the Prince of France, who became the next Louis XI, one of the most famous French kings. And this was a time when Scots and French were fighting against the English during the 100 Years' War. Something like 30,000 Scots soldiers fought in France against the English during the Middle Ages. Another little known fact, really. But Margaret Stuart was, she was a teenage bride. Louis XI, the future Louis XI, hated her. He thought it was an arranged marriage that his father had sort of forced upon him. And she was much despised, but she was, by all accounts, a lovely creature who wrote poetry. One of the things she did was write poetry. When she died aged 19 before Louis became actual King of France. And one of the first things he did was tear up all her poetry. And so very little is known about Margaret, apart from the fact that France's greatest poet of the time, called Alain Chartier, had a dream, which is actually figures in certain paintings in France, that Margaret Stuart had given him a poet's kiss. And that's what this is about. It's called Margaret de Cosse, Margaret of Scotland. Margaret Stuart wrote poetry every evening. She was loved for it by a few. but to most of the courtiers, she was the butt of jokes. They laughed at her clothes, her diet, her manners, but most of all, her desire to write, as if a teenager from the savage north could have noble fancies and the skill and wit to pen them. Her husband hated her, married her for her dowry of Scottish troops, tore her verses up when she died. He was a successful king, in other words, a brutal thug with libraries of books written about him. But she is remembered in the vague and beautiful ways that matter to some, in scraps and stories that might be dreams. They say the master writer Alain Chartier, France's finest, had a vision where she graced him with a poet's kiss. That's Margaret Ducos. Thank you very much, Sandy, for talking about the Plague of Poems, which was a kind of weird year-long experience, which I thought was just going to last 4 days or something like this. But thanks to the generosity of poets worldwide, who, giving off their own time and so on, sent video poems. It was a great experience. But obviously, lockdown was an odd occasion. But I do thank it for producing a poem, which I think is possibly my favourite poem that I've ever written. And I was sitting in the garden during lockdown and thinking about what constituted a poem, whether it mattered when it came down to it, what order any words were in, or what the words were for that matter. And I wrote this poem called Positioning 3 Words in a Poem. While the broadband is being strummed by all the air guitarists, I'm sitting among the flowers considering the positioning of 3 words in a poem. I am positioning 3 words in a poem while blackbirds leave questions in the air and Brian, the cat next door, turns blank eyes to the cloudless sky. Positioning of 3 words in a poem is not hard work, or work at all, really. It is like imagining 3 drops of water on a leaf. Any order would do, or any leaf. I think positioning 3 words in a poem on this day pretending to be summer is like a Renaissance painting, the hermit crouched over his gnomic text, while through the window behind the whole world writhes in a dazzle of war or plague. Or in fact, maybe this is like opening the mind with 3 perfectly milled keys, so I see the argolid or Anguri, the light on the sea smoking between the pines, and that somehow enters the poem too, and infuses each word I am positioning with a different meaning. So a new poem builds up marvelously around them like scaffolding in the sun, and that poem speaks, as all do, of love. I am confident that these 3 very ordinary words I am positioning in this poem are now sacred words, in the order I imagined them or any other. And I will leave them here on the grass for now in this circle of light. I do like that one myself, I have to say. Yeah. I'll read you one about Jessamine was reading you one about Palestine there, and I'm saying that you know, she hides herself of necessity from the terrible reality of the horrors of the world, which we are so impotent to sort of try and affect. And this is a poem of Palestine. It's about a museum that's in Shatila, the refugee camp in Jordan. And it's not a museum as we would have it in the West, you know, full of audiovisual stuff and curators and absolutely sort of state-of-the-art technology. This museum is simply filled with pieces of masonry, letterboxes, doorknobs, bills, things that have been taken from houses that have been ploughed or destroyed by the Israelis. And it's called the Museum of Memory. And people just wander into this museum and look at things. The Museum of Memory. The Museum of Memory in Shatila is little more than a shack that reeks of oil and cigarette smoke. It holds old pots and pans, faded papers, documents, other tat. There are no videos or interactive panels, no curator much of the time, but people wander in and out to smell or touch or sit in the mess of the past. History is not much more than a joke, the ghosts of men and maps, but memories are something else. Kamel holds his grandfather's key, huge, made from solid iron, a key to a locked door of a locked house, a farm left in haste, a blur of years ago, and all these things are dust now. The walls gone, the furniture broken, the trees torn down, all lost beyond the key only, which Kamel turns over and over in his palm and unlocks air. I get a lot of inspiration from my family, and I rehash I had a sort of troubled and dislocated family, entertaining in a way, but a difficult childhood. And I come back to my mother and father and write poems with them all the time. And I keep writing. I've written a couple about my mother recently, and this was called At Sea. And it talks about visiting. I don't know whether you have seamen's missions in the US or whatever. Seamen's missions where used to be sort of run by charitable institutions, and fishermen and seamen used to go in there and get cups of tea and so on. These places don't exist anymore, really. And this one that I'm thinking about in Oban, where I wrote this poem about, in the northwest of Scotland, had been turned into a really posh seafood restaurant. And so I went there to have this big meal, this same place that I'd gone to with my mother in the late 1960s. It's called At Sea. I'm having scallops and Sauvignon Blanc at a restaurant with huge windows, and the sea and sun are throwing light on my face. When I was here with my mother, it was the fisherman's mission. The walls were painted dark blue, and she had a long faded coat, not because she was poor, because she is from the past. Everything is dark blue in the past and half seen, the wallpaper, the pictures with nothing on them, the faces with nothing on them, a tea urn maybe, a giant tea urn, or perhaps no tea urn at all. The mind has one go and the past is stuck there, rinsed by other stuff, old films, other photos, you or others thinking, it can't have been like that, probably more like this. At the end, what's left is that colour, dark blue, and my mother saying, this is nice, they help people lost at sea. Right, I don't have got time for, I'll do one more. One more for a laugh. Listen, another one of Scots, and then one last one after that. I've always felt, of course, being a history teacher and all the rest, and talking about history, obviously women had no history at all, apparently. Back in the time, women had no voice. But I wrote this poem because I'd read about James Clerk Maxwell, who's a great famous physicist, of course, and who was born in southwest Scotland. And Einstein talked about his huge importance in physics. But his wife, Katie Clerk Maxwell, not only helped him with his experiments, but in actual fact innovated a whole lot of stuff, which got absorbed into his work. But obviously, she wasn't mentioned at all, right? Like many other sort of women of resource and so on. And so this one's called Boxed Women. It actually comes about because of a strange sort of fact that St. Margaret of Scotland, Queen Margaret of Scotland, her head was preserved in a box and kept by Mary Queen of Scots. There's an odd fact for you. So this one's called Boxed Women. Mary Queen of Scots had Queen Margaret of Scotland's head in a box, a jewelled reliquary on wee wheels, which would cure passing lepers. I wonder if the Scots College in Paris got hold of Mary Stuart's head in order to a box set. It's funny how so many women's heads ended up in boxes. Katie Clark Maxwell, her early life obscure, that's a quote, spent muckle time staring into a box, wondering at visions of colour and the weirdness of gases. But you've got to scour through the body of her man's work to find her ghost. Her papers were burnt. After she nursed him through his last illness, no much was kent. She was perhaps struck down by distress, quote, when you're joined to a man, either your head or the wheels come off. Right, last poem. This one, I'll end in a joyful note. And this is a kind of recent poem called Carbonation, and it's a totally true story. I was in this marvelous train ride from Glasgow up towards Oban, and there was a French, I think there was a French boy and a Spanish girl in the seat across from me, and they were all over each other, but they were talking all the time about carbonation. This is absolutely true, you wouldn't believe it, but they were talking about carbonation the entire time between Glasgow and Ardluey. And so Ardluey is on Loch Lomond for those who have been to Scotland. And so I wrote this poem about it called Carbonation. It's a joyful poem, I think. A young man is talking to a girl about carbonation. He is French, I think. She might be Spanish, I'm not sure. They have a common language, carbonation. And I've been talking about it from Glasgow to Ardluey. He has been carbonating for a few years, and it is a tricky technique. They are pressed close, but in a liquid way, changing shape as the tube of the train lurches through rain. Her hair is black on his shoulder, and he talks into her glistening ear, a hand on her waist, the short floral skirt. At one point during the conversation, she climbs onto his lap, the better to talk about carbonation. The heady mix of different elements at boiling point, the pressure to contain. I have never properly understood the process of carbonation till now. Right, thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Everybody, there's nothing I can say better than the poetry that we just heard from Hugh McMillan. But I will say just a few brief words. You'll see everything in the chat. What a great reading so far, our first two readers. Thank you for bringing not only the museums of memory, but the music, the music of memory, like encapsulated in your poems. I feel like that's what we were so engaged with here, and that fusion of history and memory, which Evan Boland talks about this too. They're different things. History and the past are different. And it's incredible to have both brought into our consciousness through poetry. I so appreciate it, and I so appreciate you. And again, folks, please, please do go back into the archives of Cultivating Voices live poetry and look for A Plague of Poets, the astounding curation of Hugh McMillan, and now you know why those were curated so well in hearing the poetry today. Thank you again. What an absolute beautiful reading. Well, again, folks, when we put this reading together, I knew that we were in for an astounding Sunday, and it just continues now with our third reader. Again, I've had the pleasure of hearing Eithne Hand read, because she launched with, or she read with Jessamine, and as you know, I'm so fond of my Salmon siblings, and grateful to have them come onto the program. Folks, get ready for the poetry of Eithne Hand, who is a writer, radio and theater producer from Greystones, County Wicklow in Ireland. She is currently one of the artists in residence at the Hawkswell Theatre in Sligo. And she was head of RTE Radio 1 from 2003 to 2006. And during that time and currently produces the weekly Poetry File on RTE Lyric FM. I speak only for myself when I say that I wish that we have some radio programs that we're able to benefit from, but they are too far and few between, as astounding as they are. And to have a radio like RTE produce poetry the way that it does is quite a thing to experience. And Eithne has been at the center of that, as her bio says, for years. So thank you for elevating poetry to across the airwaves. Eithne's first collection, poetry collection, is Fox Trousers. And as I said, it was launched by Salmon Poetry in February 2021. Would you please give the warmest of welcomes to Eithne Hand.
Thank you, Sandra. Thanks, everybody. Hello, I'm actually not in Ireland at the moment, although I usually am, but I'm in Cornwall in a shepherd's hut. So I'm hoping that the Wi-Fi is all staying put, but I think it will. And I'm really happy to be here. And I'm so impressed with what we've just heard. It's very hard to follow somebody as amazing as Hugh McMillan. And I love Jessamine's poetry so much. And I was so honored that we were able to launch together, even if it was in lockdown and we haven't yet managed to be on the same stage. So this is my first collection, Fox Trousers. The photograph is from a Belgian photographer called Rosalind Raymond. And I'm going to just read a selection for you, a bit of a mix here and there. So my poetry is short, so I'll try and get through a few of them anyway and not keep everybody too late. But I'd like to really thank everybody who's actually online and giving the time to poetry. So the first poem is the poem that has the title in it, so just to be helpful. And it's called Summer Yearn. It's almost dark in my bedroom. Outside, the lake still glows. If I could just slide from these covers and lie in the tickling grass, I'd eavesdrop on the crowd readying for the night, pulling on their fox trousers, badger coats, heading for our neighbours' hills. Hares on the beat, hedgehogs on the ball, deer drinking long in the late night lake bar. Mink slink through brambles as midnight's satin shifts from the east and a liquid dark slips over us all. This is a poem that doesn't need any introduction, called Face Value. Face Value 1. This amazing amount of people have connected with this poem, which is interesting just in terms of women and this experience. I didn't realize it was such a universal thing, but here we go. 1. At the wash basin, I watched you shaving, never wanting to miss a minute. my face level with the basin, staring up as you pulled faces for a change. Soaping, scraping with open blade or newfangled razor, you dipped and tapped metal to ceramic and back to jawline again, stretching the skin taut on your neck until I passed the towel. You patted on cologne, now smooth and handsome. I looked and looked, not learning, but catching your love of mirrored self. 2. You never cared for makeup, never taught us how. A pink box of powder clouds rarely opened, dust on all the little pots. Only lipsticks rubbed smooth, the muted ones, never loud. You had little time for mirrors. A lick and a spit would do. You brushed your hair while putting on your shoes, chose your alternating teachers' dresses like so many uniforms. And when you did put on your war paint, we teased your dolled up face. There was no chair at your dressing table, never time to sit. This is a kind of poem of its time. It is, as Jessamine said, the first collection is often older poems, so this is an older poem, but it still makes some connection, I think. Atlas. Been so long since you touched me, my spine tingles to feel your hand lift me from the shelf. Oh, the turn of me in your fingers. Don't think I've not seen you click online, plan. Last week, you booked a whole trip on your phone. I almost died. It's not just me. You reach for Chambers' dictionary, he blushes with relief. Thesaurus worries her pages are stuck. Gideon's past caring. About this box on the floor, you caress me, yet talk of Oxfam or attic. Must I leave? Feel the sun warm me, my pinks and blues, reminding you that my world is still yours. This is another, I think actually in the digital world, another lost art, but I think we'll all recognize it anyway. The Focus Puller's Father. While others search for hats and coats, we wait as final credits roll. Best boy, gaffer, key grip, words which have crisscrossed our dinner table for months, like so many camera angles. We know all about dolly tracks, windsocks, and pulleys. By 10, you'd become an expert at guessing distance, a human measuring tape practicing on the cat. You watched how people in cafes leaned forward as they spoke. Now, you don't look through the lens, but you have the most vital task, to keep that image sharp. Here comes your name. Tears blur my eyes. This is a poem which just got into the collection because it was actually written at the beginning of lockdown, at the time when we were all struggling to try and find positivity, and especially when there were things like celebrations happening in our families and our family groups. So my sister had a roundy birthday at the beginning of lockdown, and I wanted to try to find the positive. My contagious sister, for Una. Will you two just stop? And we'd try, focused on the Sunday roast, peas and potatoes. But the lure of the laugh, unbridled as a wild pony, reeled us back in. I'd glance, and you were pure gone. Then so was I. A fit of the giggles rising through our small bodies, shoulders shaking, eyes streaming, noses bubbling. I caught from you, my giggling sister, an incurable love of laughter. This is a prose poem, and also trying to honor somebody, a bit like in a different way of Hugh's honoring of people in the past. This is called Light Your Own Fire. The prefrontal cortex, like a conductor waving a baton, urges our brain to hunt for that lost name or date while we drive cars or make the dinner. Later, we remember as clearly as July and can't believe we ever forgot it. Take Wag Dodge, a fireman caught in a forest blaze in '49, who, realizing he was in danger, stopped, began to burn the grassy area around him, then hunkered down, kerchief to mouth, taking shallow breaths close to ground as the fire passed over. Afterwards, with 13 dead, Wag couldn't explain where his idea came from. He had no memory of learning that trick, but somewhere in his head, a conductor was wildly waving. This is one of those poems where all the bits of it are actually true, in the way that the kind of fantastic way of church history. So it was just kind of irresistible. So it's called The End of St. Barbara. Her father understood that 3 windows in her new bathhouse proved her conversion. Patron saint of mathematics, pray for us. He oversaw her torture, but the fire snuffed out. By morning, all her wounds had healed. Patron saint of extreme events, pray for us. He beheaded her himself, and she swore before dying that to call her name in distress would bring relief. Patron saint of the Italian Navy, pray for us. Heading home in a thunderstorm, her father was consumed by flame. Patron saint of lightning, pray for us. In 1969, she was cut from the litany, her story judged to be entirely fabulous. Patron saint of fireworks, grant us peace. Just one of another historical connection. To make a mark not permanent. Starless of old Rome. If I drew a line with you, it would be 35 miles long. Ever dry, no spilt ink, your hexagonal shaft fixes you to table or ear. Beloved of carpenter, cartoonist, and child, it said that Steinbeck used 60 of you a day on Grapes of Wrath, 300 on East of Eden. Breadcrumbs were always known to do the trick, yet stationer Hyman Lipman first glued on the rubber. I think you've always known your role was to be erased. And I'm just going to do 3 more, and one of them is more recent, so it's not in the collection. It's one of the COVID poems. And it just struck me when I was listening to you reading about the past being dark blue. So this is called COVID-19 Recipe for the Blues. Ingredients: 10 spoonflakes of cobalt, best picked at evening. Use smalt if cobalt not in season. 2 smudges of Aegean and 2 of teal. 1 snatch of lapis. 4 dabs of corn flour. A shade of cyan to taste. Method: 1. With the underwing of a magpie, dip all in a warm bowl. 2. Sieve the light of an April day until all is air. 3. Let the confection sit until twilight. 4. Turn the lights to royal. Forget there were ever riches before this. 5. Allow your eyes to feast. 6. hug your blanket of indigo. 7, wallow in iridescence and swallow. And I'm going to finish also with a joyful one. This is the final poem in Fox Trousers. And it's called Joy Comes to Me as a Flying Trapeze, which is actually also true. But anyway, sometimes it's just mad what's in our heads. I close my eyes and feel myself swing high in the big top, corner to corner, gripping tightly to the narrow bar. I swoop down, arc back, soar to the top and leap, twisting to meet waiting hands, chalk-wristed, always upside down. In my secret high wire life, the faceless catcher never misses. Thank you all very much. Thanks a million for allowing me to be part of this great group. And I'm looking forward to hearing Neil, and thank you, Sandra, for putting it all together.
Thank you, Eithne. Oh, what an exquisite reading. From the litanies of the patron saints to the litanies of the blues, that cobalt, and it took me right back to your first poem of the glowing lake and all that iridescence. And even though you said there's little time for mirrors, all I felt as I listened was how I was in a hall of mirrors, of like just these pristine handheld mirrors holding up things so that I could see the objects and the iridescence of life in your poems. Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you so very much. The new collection is Fox Trousers. You saw it here, friends. You saw the fox. Eithne Hand, thank you. Our final reader for today, just today, my friends, of course, just today, is Neil Young. And of course, you will hear, you've heard, and will continue to hear about Neil's founding of Drunk Muse Press, along with his compatriots that are here in the room. Make no mistake, when you hear Neil Young's poetry, you will forget about the other Neil Young. Forget about the other Neil Young. Don't mistake the two. This is the Neil Young we've come to hear today, and that you will continue to revel in and revere in the music and memory of what Neil's poetry has to offer. Well, Neil Young hails from West Belfast from the 1960s, 64 particular, a year I'm partial to, and now lives in Northeast Scotland. He's worked as a laborer, a kitchen porter, and a stagehand before becoming one of those necessary troubadours, a journalist. Neil's publications include Lagan Voices, The Parting Glass, 14 Sonnets from Tapsaltiri, 2016, Jimmy Cagney's Long Lost Kid Half Brother, from Blacklight Engine Room 2017, Shrapnel from Poetry Salzburg in 2019, and After the Riot from Nien Pens Press 2021. A prolific writer of consequence, Neil is also the founder of the Poets Republic magazine, and as I've mentioned, a co-collaborator of Drunk Muse Press. Would you please welcome the Neil Young?
Thank you. That's the most flattering introduction I can remember ever having. I think I'm just going to tune in here every Sunday now. As you can see, I'm a little bit dark here. That's actually bright sunshine for northeast Scotland. I'm looking at myself and I look like a bit like a Thunderbird's villain, but I'm told by Hugh it's quite a good look. So I'm going to stick with it for the time being. I'm going to be reading from After the Riot. The title really references my preoccupation with the repercussions of history, personal and political histories colliding, war, migration, and how they impact on us and direct our lives. But just to reverse and break with tradition, which is the usual thing that poets do is they get their relentless miserablism in, and then they end with a kind of upbeat poem. I'm going to do it the other way around with one of the few lighter, more upbeat poems in this little volume, which is a true story going back several decades. Or it might have been a true story because it's one of those what if poems. What you speculate about what might have happened, you know, if you'd met somebody. But in this poem, I suppose I take the view that it goes around with things possibly going wrong. And it's called To the Young Woman Who Wrote Her Number on My Left Thigh on the Nightclub Stairs, Cushendall, September 1994. I've just got to unsteam my glasses, if you excuse me. And Cushendall is a place in Antrim in Northern Ireland, and it's one of the wildest places that I've ever been to. If I hadn't been so hasty to take a shower, I'd have called, you'd have been home. I'd be on a train to Dublin the next weekend. We'd have met under Cleary's clock, and you'd have mistaken me briefly for someone exotic, introduced me to your 5 brothers as a friend you were showing round town. We'd have interrailed and slept on bare, sticky floors. You'd have fled your horrified parents so we could share a flat in Camden. By now, we'd have our own fridge magnet collection, hate each other. You'd be blaming me for the baby out of marriage that heaped eternal shame on your God-fearing folks back home. We'd be getting divorced, feuding over money and the kid. Or by some unlikely fluke of luck, one of us might be well paid. We'd be making an annual pilgrimage to Cushendall, where we get pissed in Johnny Joe's. You'd make a ritual of writing on my inner thigh, or someone else's thigh, a young fellas who skipped the shower and took the train to Dublin. I'll catch you on the rebound. So. Back in 2002, 2003, there were lots of demonstrations happening right across the world as it became increasingly obvious that a script was being unraveled and played out by Western powers for the invasion of Iraq. And it was quite interestingly because millions and millions of people right across the world were protesting and demonstrating about what was so easy to see was going to happen and was being contrived. I took part in several demonstrations. Some of them turned quite violent. Some people might remember in London at the time, the American embassy was in Grosvenor Square. It's moved now. And I was there at a time when a mini riot broke out. And this is about that riot. It's called Grosvenor Square, London. And this is another true story, bizarre story. There was this fella, or dad he was, don't ask me why he was there, but not to protest against war, I'm guessing. Unless sleeping Ben in a pram was his covert weapon. Because just as the riot broke out and people were scattering, charging, surging, trampling everywhere, and smoke bombs thickened, flames were rising, and up on the wall of the US Embassy, 3 masked demonstrators were strutting, burning the stars and stripes to the roar and salutes of the crowd. And just as we could hear the first incoming clatter of hooves, he was right in front of me, lifting the pram. And me and 2 women, without any prompting, grabbed an end each and hoisted the weigh-in, still sleeping through the whole shebang, onto the pavement beside the side street. And then the dad was shouting, stranded. So all of us lifted him. He was crowd surfed to the edge of the riot and smiling, laughing, thanking us as he was planted down with his child, then hurrying off from the scene. And that was the instant I hunched down low, just in time to miss the shattering glass from the pub windows and the robo-cops as they zigzagged on the street and swiped through bodies and smoke. And it makes me wonder, these many years later, why it was so easy to lift a small child backwards in a pram through a riot when millions of us couldn't stop a war. This is a memory. I was fortunate enough to be in Belfast around the time when the Belfast Agreement was signed, and I met up with some friends there, and there was a night, an extraordinary night, when U2 were playing. I'm not a U2 fan, but the whole atmosphere and spirit throughout the city was something I'll never forget, and I've never witnessed anywhere again. And this is called The Night That Peace Broke Out. Sammy and Connor great crashed U2, swerved invisibly past the security guards, while I ripped my trousers and nearly my bollocks, scaling 10-foot rails. But who needed Bono or even a band when there were settees on pavements all over the wilder corners of Belfast? The big screen music was always in range. Ghetto blasters and braziers took over side streets, and the Lagan banks ribboned through the dark for me like a guiding soul. I bought 20 Rothmans from a car boot chancer, handed £10 to a kid just because he asked. And before I'd hit midnight's last orders, was floating down Great Victoria Street as if I was drunk on the very air. Trapeze of lights and noise and revelers. And it was there, mid-pavement, right there, I paused and kissed the beaming woman in polka dot green as she leaned in at the same fluked glance to me. We said thank you, then left. That's all. Thanks for an exultant memory. I'm going to read, this is a poem, 2 poems really. One is about my daughter and one was prompted by her. This is called This Harbour. My daughter, I'm very fortunate that where I live in northeast Scotland, it's a little wee harbour town. And the harbour and the braes and the hills and the fields around here and the beach are her playground. And it's as if it's part of her, you know, and she becomes part of it as well. It's a very historic, interesting place as well. This area, it's called the Mearns. And this is called This Harbour. Though no one can possess it, this is your harbour. Breakwater, ancient stones, clock tower, slipway, sands and lanes, braes and coves, Pictish ruins to Covenanters Cross, the war memorial scratched on a hilly skyline, Dunnottar Castle where Scotland's jewels were smuggled out under a quine's coarse frock to dodge Cromwell's shock troops, and centuries later film directors etched silhouettes across the remainder of walls. All this is yours, from ice cream shop to fairy pools, topography, history, ghosts and customs too, known or neglected, dormant under rocks, or snagged on nets, buried under silted tears of dead fish and the footprints of millennia. Fog and the way the sunlight flashes over the inner harbour water in summer until the last buckets and spades are gone and children leave no more than ghosts of play, are yours. They were yours from the day you shivered homewards in a scratchy towel, and will be yours even when you are gone. They are indented now by memory's invisible ink, as you are too on them. How am I doing for time? Couple more. Hugh will recall that, and Jessamine will recall a couple of years ago, we dragged ourselves around Ireland on a poetry tour before the world changed very drastically overnight. And it was very nice that my family, my daughter and my wife came along, but my daughter has protested ever since about the prospect of being taken to poetry readings, and she's 9 now, so I can hardly blame her. So, but you know, this poem is really about that poetry should be entertaining in the best meaning of that word, you know. So it's called Freed Verse. When this is all over, there will be no more hellish poetry readings. 8-year-old girls will not be required to accompany dads to listen to grey, soft-spoken people attempting to be profound in verse. There will be socialism, homes with a garden for all, picnics, parties, more homeworking, a universal declaration of the rights of the dog. Climate change will be halted, and boring poetry readings will be outlawed. Francine, instead of dreary, hushed evenings in libraries and coffee shops, there will be free-for-alls, bookshop karaoke and face-painting fests. Most of all, noise. The only poems allowed in public will be about Pokemons. All others will be stuffed in a drawer. Poets who breach the new rules will be quarantined, made to eat their epics. The rest, although they may not admit it, will thank their gods or muse that they are finally liberated. Thank you. I'm going to go, this is a poem called Imperia, and really it's about Britain's relationship with Ireland. It's often said that Ireland is Britain's last colony, and I'm often of the view that if Ireland, Northern Ireland, unites with the Republic, or Scotland departs from the Union, then all the glue that holds together the Britain, the United Kingdom, and its imperial past will start to fall apart. And that's no bad thing as far as I'm concerned, because it's a very hierarchical and hegemonic power. And it's brought sharply into focus with the relationship with Ireland, which has been magnified again by Brexit, because nobody even who was the architects of Brexit even considered that this might impact upon the peace process in Ireland. It's just, you know, people, they're just the Irish, it doesn't matter kind of thing. So this is called Imperia, and really it's about the fact that it's about hubris, and that empires implode by their own hubris and fall apart because of their own stupidity and cruelty. And I think that's what will happen with the residue of the British Empire, which is Britain itself. This is called Imperia. One day when you least expect it, when you have almost forgotten how your cartographers executed lines on the map, this ghost will appear in irreconcilable form, a beautiful, grotesque creation of your past. Those measurements scored by your predecessors, those lines will hair trigger right back. A Union flag in the oily Atlantic, where its inhabitants salute your remotest godhead in their sleep, a desert storm, a suicide pack, the very notion of yourself polluted by myth-made longevity, could be any of these, or tanks and flags burnt black that led to your unraveling. But fittingly, it is this, the nondescript, a demarcation thread that runs through village lanes to sever kiths and glens from sea to sea, a line that can't be folded into schoolbook history. This is your neighbour's payback, neither bomb nor armed revolt, but line of turf you can't horse trade, treaty you can't unpack. Did you suppose this was just your heritage spoil, where you could ride hysteria's wave, then jolly on home? Did you imagine hubris as bad PR, your conquests as old cast-offs left untracked? This was your first, will be your last, a sliced up crop of land that soils your addiction to yourself. You poked this ghost Britannia. Be thankful it is more sparing than your least act. Thank you. And I'll hand back to Sandra now. Okay.
Thank you so much, everyone. You were just listening to Neil Young. After the Riot is the newest collection. And dare I say, nothing boring about Neil Young's reading, calling out hubris, empire, freed verse for all, demonstrating perhaps, despite your daughter's plea, that the truest peace comes through poetry. Thank you so much, Neil, and thanks again to all of our new books showcase poets. Today, you marveled at the poems, the history, the music, the mirrors, the harbors, and the voices of Jessamine O'Connor, Hugh McMillan, Eithne Hand, and Neil Young. How about we unmute and share our final round of applause and appreciation.
Wow, fabulous.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great stuff.
Oh my God.
Thank you so much.
Stuff.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's some
We're hard.
serious,
Yes. Woohoo.
that's some serious hoot and hollers from our live audience today.
Thank you.
Folks, if you have any upcoming readings or announcements, this would be a great time to type them into the chat. I just want to remind you that next week we're back on Sunday for our Poets Focus. It's a themed open mic on the theme of wings. Wings. Open to all group members, 12 of you, sign up in the chat 15 minutes before showtime, and you are the features. Be looking for, it's already posted up on our page in the events section where you can register to get the Zoom link for the reading and sign up to join us next Sunday, the 17th. And again, fourth Sunday, we come back on the 24th for our new book showcase, where we'll be featuring, as I mentioned last week, the newest poet laureate of Alabama, Ashley M. Jones, who'll be joined by Judith Kerman, Elizabeth Levinson, and Karen Poppy. Again, you can register for all our Cultivating Voices live poetry readings, as I mentioned, on the event pages. And please, please do come back next week for our Poets Focus on the theme of wings. Last time's open mic brought us poets from Australia, Canada, England, Ireland, Scotland, and the United States. It was an extraordinary range of voices, and I encourage you to return next week to be one of them or just come to listen. Thanks so much for joining us today. And thanks to Don Krieger for all his magnanimous effort week after week, and to Kim Ports Parsons for her ever inviting graphics, and especially on your new website. I just want to put the plug in for your new website. And speaking of listening, my friends, our humanity always depends on our deepest of listening of one another. Thanks for joining us today to practice that not only act, but art of listening. Please take care of yourselves and your beloveds. And as I say every week, keep writing your remarkable poems. This is Sandy Yannone, and I'll see you next Sunday. Be well.